Why are there so many queer Haunting Ground fans? I believe it's because Haunting Ground unintentionally explores queer themes and anxieties. And I know that sounds insane, but you know who else is insane? This girl right here. I'm Captain Leona, your favorite storyteller, and I am here to tell you why I think Haunting Ground has some queer undertones. Listen, I know that this is definitely not common for my audience, but I'm looking to expand and I'm looking to educate people who have never heard of this kind of thing before. First and foremost, you guys need to know something. By virtue of this being a new channel, a lot of you guys don't know, but I'm actually fruity. I'm a bisexual woman and I've been so all my life. You know what else I've been my entire life? Insane! I mean, a writer. I've been a writer. So by virtue of being queer and a writer, I happen to know how queer stories are told in media. You may look at Haunting Ground and say there is nothing queer about it. If anything, there's a lot of feminine horror to it. But you're actually looking right into it. It's just that you need to know a different perspective. So let me begin by explaining to you a few things about queer history. It's evident that being queer for a long time in the past was kind of shunned away. We were censored to and fro. But this doesn't mean that there were no queer stories out there. It's just that they hid in plain sight so everybody could enjoy it and so queer people could tell their stories and connect with others. Essentially, what artists did was create characters and their stories and tailor them in a way where everybody could relate, but they were intrinsically part of the queer experience, especially back then. From the character design to the symbols, to the metaphors, the similes, the color palettes, everything. So what does this have to do with Haunting Ground? Well, examining Haunting Ground with this perspective in mind gives you a little more details that you probably wouldn't have thought of. The two characters that we're going to be looking at are Daniella and Fiona, because, obviously. The Velitas really just represents childhood naivete and how that can be dangerous, whereas Ricardo and Lorenzo are just complete insane people. And Huey is just a dog. And let me be very frank and clear here, Daniella does a lot of the heavy lifting in the queer undertones, but Fiona really does have something that is very poignant and interesting to point out. So, let's begin with Daniella. Remember when I said that the color palette was a thing? Daniella has a very interesting color palette because in her normal form, she has green, pink, and white, right? And this was only pointed out to me when I read a blog, which I'm going to put in the description, that pointed out that is the color of the genderqueer flag. And I know this is unintentional, but it's a very interesting coincidence. And I may be insane for saying this, but does that not mean that in hard mode, she resembles a little bit of the lesbian flag? I'm just saying, Your Honor. She is for the gays. Sorry. Anyways, back on topic to the most important and interesting thing. When you hear Daniella, what is the first phrase that comes to mind? Besides the dinner is served, miss, like we know that scene is very gay, but we're not gonna be talking about that yet. To me personally, the first phrase that comes to mind is, I am not complete. I know this represents the sentiment that a lot of infertile women have about not feeling like women because they can't give birth. But frankly, isn't that also kind of a queer sentiment? I can't speak for trans people, but in the past, I kind of heard this sentiment going around the community. Not being able who you want to be and constantly having to fight that. That is a strange feeling, and I can kind of relate. Obviously to a lesser extent, but my identity not being able to be expressed kind of felt like I was not complete and I was just fooling everyone. And that is another interesting thing about Daniella, not being who you want to be. That is something that everybody can relate to. But for the queer experience, it's something so normal. And what's worse, Daniella feels like she's not who she wants to be because there's Fiona right in front of her. Fiona is essentially what she wants to be. Think about it, the moment Fiona comes in, Ricardo and Lorenzo try to protect her and also keep her in the castle. Meanwhile, Daniella just gets smacked around. Yet, when Daniella first meets Leona, she's not hostile towards her. There is some kind of curiosity. And that curiosity slowly turns into an obsession, but mostly because Daniella finds Fiona fascinating. She finds her so fascinating that she really gets up close when she tells her that the dinner is served. Literally, that scene just turned everybody gay. Like, I could not. And yes, let's also address the elephant in the room. Daniella does behave very inappropriately to Fiona. She touches her in her sleep, and that is not good. But it does speak to a point of Daniella not knowing the boundaries and not knowing what to do with this feeling that she has within her, which is resentment. And this part is really just internal misogyny, and that is staying as internal misogyny, really. There's nothing really inherently queer about that. That's just it. But there's another little layer that I want to propose. Could it be that Daniella is confused about how she feels about Fiona? Think of it as a mixture of I hate her because she's what I want, I love her because she is what I want, you know? And we know Daniella is not doing okay. Like, the poor thing cannot process her emotions, and she cannot even process pain. What does Daniella's crush have to do with the queer undertones? Well, I'm sorry to say, but this is unrequited love in the extremest of expressions. This is really just a sapphic experience, and I'm so sorry to say that. Darlings, we really are losing out here, okay? And listen, let's address something really quick. Daniella is a villain, she is an antagonist, and a lot of you people may be wondering, okay, she may be queer representation, but really, is it any good? Because she's a villain. Well, this wouldn't be new for the queer community. It really is no secret that villains have been portrayed as queer and flamboyant for a lot of our history in media. I only need to point you to Psycho, I only need to point you to Silence of the Lambs, and those are very unfortunate representations. But in other horror movies, those villains are a little less psychotic, and it's just a lot more badass. Seriously, being a villain and queer seems like just bread and butter to us. Well, I can't speak for everyone, but to me this seems to be just a recurrent theme. It's kind of part of the culture now. And I know that a lot of people actually take some kind of pride into being villains because, let's face it, being a villain is kind of cool. A lot of people remember villains a lot more than they remember the heroes. So we kind of don't take that to heart sometimes. Unless we're villainized and antagonized. That is completely different. So listen, what I'm saying is that Daniella did nothing wrong, except for the two things that she kind of did wrong. But besides that, she's just a badass. We don't understand her. So all this yapping about Daniella, and I really could go into deeper, more philosophical length about that, but I'm not smart enough. So let's just talk about Fiona. What about Fiona? Quick intermission to say that if you really like this video so far, give it a thumbs up. This helps the algorithm push more content like this to people who may like it, so thank you very much. Intermission over. Let's get back to it. Let's be fair here. There's nothing about her that is outwardly queer, but there's also nothing about her that is outwardly straight. Fiona really is a blank slate for us to bleed into or feel sympathy for. Ergo, I don't think she's going to have many characteristics that are, defining. So besides that little gay run that she does, what else is queer about her? There is one theme that is very recurrent with her, and that theme is the fear of losing your bodily autonomy. And I know this is a heavy hitter. Everybody fears no longer having bodily autonomy. But I am not mistaken in saying this is a hugely queer sentiment. This is one of our biggest anxieties, especially for trans people. Let's not even get into disabled queer people. Like, this is just a cocktail of the worst. It is very valid to interpret this fear of bodily autonomy to be something associated to womanhood, abortion rights and all of that. But it really is also, and very much so, a queer problem. And I think that is the thing that draws us to this game. We get to play as Fiona, who is battling this evil and coming on top at the end. When you see her come out of that castle after defeating all the annoying little bitches in this castle, you feel a sense of relief. It's cathartic. I've said this once and I'll say it again, but I feel like horror has the inherent ability of grabbing our core fears and exposing them to the world. And while that can be a little bit like, oh, I'm a little naked around here, it's very human and it helps us connect. We relate to other people who have that same fear, just painted differently, and we kind of start to realize that we are a little more alike than we thought. And I believe Haunting Ground has this perk built into it. And horror also helps in telling our stories in an easier digestible way for people who have never experienced it. That is what Fiona's story is about, and that is what Daniella's tragedy explains. Haunting Ground also tells the fear and the horrors of having a body, regardless of queerness or not. I think we can all relate that having a human body is kind of terrifying. But all of these little things that I mentioned intersection with queer identity, queer experiences, and anxieties. And I think that's why people gravitate towards this game. It's cathartic to see our fears plastered somewhere. And most importantly, it's important that somebody noticed and decided to tell this story with us. And because with horror, we form a community we can find people to relate to. And that is really beautiful to me. Whether you agree with my points or not, I thank you for at least sitting down and listening to what I had to say. I hope you learned something at least. That sounds kind of menacing. I hope you learned something. But I wonder what you queer viewers think about this interpretation. Is there something that I missed? Is there something that you really want to point out? Feel free to drop it down on the comment section below. And if you truly enjoy this channel and the direction it's going, please consider tipping me on coffee. I do everything myself in this channel and every little bit will help me. With all of that said, thank you very much for watching. This has been your Captain Leona, and I will be seeing you in the next video.